Good morning, good afternoon, and evening to everyone who's joining us here today. It's a thrill to be together on this final day of the Stockholm World Water Week for a really exciting session and one of my favorites during the whole week around collaborative action to close the gender gap in the WASH workforce. And this session is hosted by the Safe Water Network and USAID under the SIWA Sustainable Enterprises for Health program that promotes safe water access to the urban poor. So I'm going to be your moderator today. My name is Kelly Ann Naylor, and I am the Director for Water Sanitation and Hygiene at UNICEF. And in this session today, I'm joining you from New York, so there's sometimes morning noises, so it's part of the life here. So in this session, we will talk about the persistent challenges of gender inequality in the WASH sector and the WASH workforce, and also see how our collaborative actions on the ground have helped to overcome these challenges by breaking gender norms in the WASH sector. I think by now it's recognized that women are such an untapped pool of talent. You'll see us here today for the water sector, but there is still a very significant gender gap in the WASH sector workforce. And many of us know the IWA 2016 study that found on average less than 17% of the workforce in 15 countries were female professionals. And more recently, there was the World Bank study on the Women in Water Utilities Breaking Barriers report released in 2019 that found that only 1 in 5 water workers are women. So this idea of bringing together economic opportunity as a driver for change is one that we really wanted to explore today. And I think we often think of the SDGs as 17 individual goals, but really over these last 5 years, we've seen that when we can see how these goals work together, we've been able to achieve the greatest impacts, the biggest benefits of development come when these goals work together for transformative change. So we believe that by working towards the SDG Goal 5 on gender equality together will help us to achieve Goal 6 of safe water and sanitation for all. And I think we don't have to look far to see how the water sector hurdles can lead to substantial negative economic and social impact that disproportionately affect women. For instance, water collection time and efforts detract from women's ability to contribute to income generation, impacts girls' attendance in schools, and therefore also any time to take care of other either sick family members or children. I think women also quickly see the advantages of investing in water treatment infrastructure and often play a critical role in convincing the broader community to take forward the construction of water systems, also operation and maintenance, repair, and long-term management. So this active participation can also bring forward economic empowerment financially, which can also lead to confidence and ensure the sustainability of water systems. So these are all many parts of the positive synergies that can be found by bringing together gender equality and WASH. I think the good news, and that we'll hear today from our amazing panel, is that the sector is making progress towards gender diversity over these 20 years. And that we are really being able to find concrete examples of how we're able to combine technical and socio-environmental empowerment with economic solutions. So there's huge potential here. And just to say, as UNICEF, the organization that I represent, we're also really looking into this as part of our new strategic plan that will cover the period 2022 to 2025, where we really see that all WASH approaches through our program must have gender transformation as a foundational principle. So in our session today, we are going to bring together some of the highlights from the SIWA program that's been implemented by the Safe Water Enterprise Alliance partners in India, where local women with limited formal education are at the helm as water entrepreneurs and operators, managing the community's safe water source and also earning a livelihood. So this program has been expanded to 11 states in India. So the bulk of our session today is going to be a panel discussion, and there will be an opportunity for you to, as an audience, to ask them questions. So if you do have questions, you can put it in the Pathables link, and we will be bringing this to them at the end of the session. So I want to go ahead and introduce our incredible panel of leading thinkers and doers on the gender and WASH transformation. And first, we have Ms. Portia Pursley, who is the Division Chief of WASH at USAID, joining us today from Washington, D.C. We have Ms. Sylvia Cruz Vargas, who is the Director of International Programs at the PepsiCo Foundation. We have Ms. Pooja Sin, who is the Head of the Program and Monitoring at Safe Water Network, and Ms. Deepa Karithikian, the co-founder and director of the Athena Informatics for India. So this session format, as I said, will be questions and answers. So the Government of India, development partners and NGOs are endeavoring to bridge this gender-based inequalities to reduce the disparity between men and women. So today we're going to hear from the partners on how that we can look at these lessons and manage them for greater social impact. We're going to start now with a video, and then we are going to be able to move on to the panel discussion. That was really beautiful. Really appreciated seeing that video and seeing how this program has really directly contributed to the lives of both the people who participated in it as well as those who benefited from the program. I think this is really great to see those images and really bring us to the project and see how it's working. So this session is going to share these practical experiences from the Safe Water Alliance partners partners, namely the Janajal, Drinkwell, Water Health, Water Life, Right Water, Safe Water Network, the MEL3 Aquatech, under this SIWA program project that mainstreamed women to operate and maintain the water ATMs, putting money into their hands rather than pots on their head. So I think this is a very visual shift in terms of how we can see this impacting really the practical life of women. So this is a huge leap in the development sector. So now what we are going to do is to be able to shift to our panel discussion. And I am thrilled now to be able to bring us now to our first panel member, who is Pooja Sin, who is the head of program and monitoring at the Safe Water Network. And Pooja, first and foremost, congratulations to the Safe Water Network for this successful example. We would really, we've been inspired by this, and we would really love to hear more from you about how this program works. And in your view, what were some of the challenges that you faced in onboarding the Safe Water Enterprise Alliance partners to be able to adopt women into the water ATM approach? And we would love to hear what were the strategies that your partners used to be able to get women to be able to participate, not only at the beginning, but to also to be able to retain women. And if I remember from 2 years ago in our discussion at Stockholm, this idea of retention was really one of the points that had come up in that first discussion. So we would love to hear from you now, 2 years later, how you've been overcoming these challenges, and what were the collaborations that you needed to be able to do this. Over to you, Pooja.
Thank you, Kelly. That's a very good question. I would like to share our experiences with our partners in India on women empowerment through water ATMs as entrepreneurs or operators. It's a pleasure to represent the Safe Water Enterprise Alliance in India, which has 40 partners today, and of which 6 partners have already implemented the Women Empowerment Program. It's a given to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is gender equality. Achieving the SDG 6.1, which is safe water for all, is the fastest route. Women, when they have access to wash, their burden is reduced by over 50%. Let me share some of our experiences from the field, along with those of our alliance partners, working on the model of QUIT, Q-U-I-T, which is question, undo, involve, and trust. That is the backbone of the model. Through this, we broke the shackles of the patriarchy and inhibited the mindsets of women. We urged them, we trained them to be treated as equal as men in technology, in water purification system, in water quality monitoring. You name it, it is there, they can be trained well. This was well built on an action plan, and then there was one support architecture, and it was further followed up by a retention program. This was well built, and it was well documented, and it was also prevalent today in multiple states of India, which has been pioneered by us in 2019, like rightly recalled by you. We had shared the story in Stockholm World Water Week way back in 2019, and it received mass coverage as well. So today, we are proud to state that 43% of the IGEL Safe Water enterprises are managed and run independently by women who have been trained to do so. And of these, they are generating livelihoods for 29% of them. In 2021, we advanced the story with a rapid assessment and a scale-up program. Gender, as we all know, is the main component for USAID for all of its programs. And under this SEVA project, which you had mentioned is Sustainable Enterprises for Water and Health, we worked with our alliance partners to collectively develop gender toolkit, like you all saw in the video, as well as an iSuite e-toolkit. These toolkits were then further translated into pictorials and local languages. And this was done to share our experiences on having created an army of master women trainers, solve their difficulties, and also get women onboarded in 17 cities and 11 states of India. Today, under the SEWA program, we provide safe water access to over 85,000 beneficiaries. And we are also supporting various government programs such as Catch the Rain, the Community Wash, and so on. I would like to also reiterate that besides these challenges, we also, during the program implementation, we identified the barriers and challenges to women participation in the water program. And these were further classified into institutional, social, educational, and political. By institutional, I mean women do not have access to capital. Educational, women are either semi-literate or there are lack of training institutions. Social, there is patriarchal mindset. Women are generally confined to unpaid domestic job roles. And last but not the least, political. Women are excluded from getting the opportunity to work on leadership or decision-making roles. Further, due to the pandemic situation and the consequent lockdown for over 6 months, we've and our partners face challenges pertaining to establishing cashless and automation at all of our water stations. And then the master women trainers were also trained online. This was earlier used to be done physically. Then there have been places where our partners could not intervene because they were mostly male-dominated areas. So that was again one of the critical challenges that we faced. But like you had asked, what are the strategies which were developed by the partners to adopt and retain women in their WASH program, in their women empowerment program, is that all of our partners, including us, under the SEWA project, we conducted the capacity building and training programs from time to time. We helped them, understand the model clearly, the objective, why the water plants to be run at what time, and then water quality monitoring and conducting the consumer awareness programs and so on and so forth. As a result, the Water Aunties program 2, we'll call it version 2 because version 2.1 was way back in 2019. So version 2 boasts of 258 women operators, 152 entrepreneurs, and 58 women as master trainers. If we see the similar figures way back in 2019, there were just 49 women self-help group members, 46 operators, and 93 women entrepreneurs. We have such cases in Maharashtra and Telangana where we have established self-help group women who today feel pride in, they think that they are contributing to the society because they are contributing by delivering safe drinking water to the community, which were earlier suffering from waterborne diseases because they were having contaminated drinking water. So, of course, we are able to achieve this because Safe Water Network has been working with our alliance partners since 2014, and we are working with them along to resolve various concerns related to regulatory and governance. We are also sharing the knowledge products, sharing the best practices as we can, so that each one of us is not putting in the same resource again. And so we have formed this alliance, Safe Water Alliance, and which is also helping us, scale up the program further. I think that answers your question, Kelly.
Pooja, thank you so much. I really, really have been listening attentively, and I think I think what for me really stands out listening to what you've said is how gender has so intentionally been part of the design of your program from the onset, in the plans, in the programming approach, in the monitoring, and then also really in the learning and documentation. And I think that is such a good example and as kind of the gold standard of how we really need to be looking at how gender transformative approaches are mainstreamed in WASH programming. And I took down those 4 dimensions. I think that is really interesting learning for the sector, that we can't only look at one dimension, but that actually it requires a multi-dimensional approach, and really took down this last point that it also requires alliances to be able to to move on, and I think that really sets the seed for the rest of the panel. So Pooja, thank you so much for that really thoughtful intervention. And next we are going to move to Ms. Portia Persley, who I introduced as the Division Chief of WASH at USAID in Washington. Portia, we know that USAID is one of the leading development agencies, both in gender and in WASH. So I think it's no surprise that you're leading on gender and WASH. Together. So we're wondering here, hearing Portia's data, hearing Portia's program design. USAID has really become increasingly more evidence-based in your program development. So what are some of the key USAID gender policies or toolkits that can guide this type of smart gender WASH programming implementation? And I'd also really like to hear your thoughts on why you think women are missing from the WASH workforce in decision-making roles, and any ideas that you have on what you think we can be doing better as WASH practitioners to be able to mainstream their participation, and how we can measure it to be able to make sure that when we say that a program is gender inclusive, that it really is, and that we are really working towards closing this gender gap. So Portia, thanks again for joining us. I know it's early in Washington, D.C., so thanks so much for being here, and now over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for that great question, and I'm just really honored to be part of this esteemed panel and to have this important discussion around gender and WASH, and really to recognize the SIWI project for its incredible accomplishments. It's really special to be part of a discussion about not just the importance of gender and WASH, but how do we really empower women through WASH? How do we really bring women more sort of squarely into the WASH workforce? And really having a conversation about why that's important from a programmatic outcomes perspective, but also why it's important from just a gender equality perspective. So before I talk a little bit about sort of the tools and policies that are gender related and that inform our WASH work, just want to have a quick touch base on how USAID is strengthening its evidence base in terms of how we approach WASH programming overall. So we really pivoted in the past year or so in our focus on looking at the past, the present, and the future to really think about the best approaches in terms of generating results, in terms of thinking through how to measure those results in a way that's meaningful and tells a story, and ensuring that we're constantly thinking about this sort of feedback loop between sort of learning and then making adaptations to our programming based on our learning. So for those who are not aware, last year we launched our first ever Water for the World implementation research agenda. And that agenda really is focused on addressing the sort of knowledge and evidence gaps that have traditionally hindered the sector's ability to both expand and sustain WASH services and to improve water resources management, or WRM. So the research agenda is comprehensive. It's available publicly on our globalwater.org website. But generally speaking, it includes 27 pretty broad research questions that really reflect the real world challenges that are critical for us to think about and address if we really want to improve the effectiveness of our WASH programs. So just to give you a quick example, there's one research question that's focused on sort of the small service providers. And it really asked the question of, like, what are the best approaches to regulate small and informal service providers? And how can this be done without disrupting services as they are after providing those services to the poorest and most vulnerable? So that's just an example of one of the key questions from our research agenda. And I urge everyone to take a few moments and have a read from our public website. So in addition to the research agenda, we've also recently completed a series of ex post evaluations. We looked at 4 rural activities and 2 urban activities, and we really reflected on the ability of us to really sustain program outcomes over time. And the time frame in terms of the closed programs was anywhere from 3 years closed to 10 years closed. And we were really hoping to sort of unpack the key drivers for sustainability. And just highlighting sort of one of the overall key findings is that generally speaking, unfortunately, we found that we really had an overall low ability to sustain the outcomes that we generated during our project implementation period, especially in rural community managed water supply and household sanitation activities. So I'd like to highlight that notably, recent studies have shown that activities that include women early in the stages of development, as the SIWI project very successfully did, tend to have a longer, more sustainable impact in terms of water and sanitation service delivery. So it's really important for us to sort of pause and reflect on the past programming and really do a bit of evaluation of those activities so that we can bring that learning and that understanding that can ground us in terms of how we address future programming. So now that we've got a little bit of context in terms of how USAID is really expanding its evidence base and how that's going to move us forward in terms of our programming, I'd like to talk a little bit more about sort of the key legislation, policy, and the key tool that we use to really guide our sort of gender smart WASH implementation at USAID. So at the highest level, for us, it's the law. The Water for the World Act of 2014, which is our authorizing legislation for our WASH program at USAID, requires in the legislation that we consider the potential for significant impact for women and girls in terms of both health and educational opportunities as we prioritize WASH investments. So that is written into our legislation. It's also a matter of operational and strategic policy for us at USAID. Our USAID Water and Development Plan, which is really our strategic framework that includes our overall goal statement, our development results, and our targets for implementation of our work in furtherance of the US Global Water Strategy, really includes a clear commitment to support gender-sensitive approaches to empower women and make sure that they are included and central to WASH-related outcomes and activities. And most importantly, and I think this is really the critical tool to highlight for us as an agency. In August of last year, we issued our first ever Gender Equality and Female Empowerment in WASH technical brief. This is part of a technical brief series that includes 8 areas, and the technical brief is also a publicly available tool that's really meant to support our USAID missions, our gender advisors, and our implementing partners to think about how we bring gender and WASH more squarely into our higher level strategies, our projects, and our activities in a way that really improves the status of women and girls and helps us achieve our overall water security, sanitation, and hygiene development objectives. So generally speaking, the brief includes a few important components. First, the brief frames the gender challenge relative to each one of our development result areas. The first development result area really being focused on strengthening governance and finance and really thinking about how we create that sort of strong capacity foundation that's critical to systems approach, and we marry that sort of capacity building and governance with any physical infrastructure investment. And with those two things together, we ensure that we increase the likelihood of more sustainable service delivery over time. So there's a framing of sort of the gender-related challenges for each one of the development results: finance and governance, increasing access to safe sanitation and key hygiene behaviors, increasing access to safe water, and strengthening water resources management. In addition to that overall framing for each one of the development result areas, there's a set of illustrative activities for implementation. We found that traditionally our WASH leads and our other development professionals, struggle to understand where to start in terms of how to address some of the gender-related challenges in WASH activities. So we provided a clear set of illustrative activities that really give people an idea of where to start and what are the types of challenges and the types of approaches and interventions that will help to address some of the gender-related impacts. So in addition to that, the brief includes a set of programming examples that really highlight how to apply some of the sort of development result level thinking and specific activities and really provide our USAID colleagues with a sense of what innovative work is going on across our missions in partnership with our implementing partners. And in addition to that, the brief includes sort of clear guidance on how to measure impact, gender-related impact at the activity level. So I think that's really the most important tool that I wanted to highlight for the audience during our discussion this morning. But just to quickly note that there are several other agency-wide policies and legislation that really guide and inform our work, including USAID's private sector engagement policy, the recently enacted Women's Entrepreneurship and Economic Empowerment Act, both of which really offer an opportunity to highlight the importance of water and sanitation activities, and really, think about giving women and girls enhanced opportunities, really taking a very focused look at reducing legal, social, and regulatory barriers. So I think that gives you a good sense of where we're headed, what tools we have on hand, and sort of our foundation in terms of grounding our work in a clear evidence base. So let me turn to your second question, which is really thinking about where are women in terms of the WASH workforce, and what can we do to mainstream them, and a little bit about how we measure impact at USAID. So as we've already talked about, we know that traditionally the role of women has been in terms of providing water for their families, and we know that globally women and girls spend on the order of 200 million hours every day collecting water, and this often prevents them from going to school, starting work, growing businesses, and engaging in social activities, and has a clear impact on the ability of women to empower themselves and make a contribution to their livelihood. So at USAID, similar to UNICEF, we really began to pivot our programming to focus more on the role of women in the WASH workforce, moving beyond this sort of perspective of women as, sort of the traditionally bearing the burden of collecting water, and really thinking about how can we empower women through our WASH work. Really thinking about how we can strengthen or increase economic opportunities, and how when women are empowered, they increase stability for the community overall. We know that recent studies have shown that, again, including women in early stages in development activities really increases our ability to provide services over the long term. So there are a few key sort of technical takeaways that we use to shape our WASH programming relative to gender. I'll just quickly walk through those. First and foremost, activities should account for women and girls as more than beneficiaries, right? Really thinking about them and their role to help us provide services. Women are consumers, they're customers, they're influencers, they're professionals. They are decision makers at the household level. They're the keeper of traditional knowledge and solutions, and really thinking about women across the spectrum of their role relative to WASH. Also, by working to change sort of discriminatory legal, social, and cultural norms, activities can really enable women and girls to become water and sanitation change agents, focusing on reducing those barriers for women and girls to receive that critical job training, to receive promotions, to receive leadership opportunities in their households and in communities, can really help women become key actors and help us to make better informed, more sustainable decisions. And finally, participatory approaches are critical. They are critically important. We know that gender-related barriers to WASH can vary widely, whether it's geographic, religious, legal, or cultural, and that those sort of key barriers can be exacerbated by other vulnerabilities like extreme poverty. So at USAID, not only must all projects consider gender-related impact, regardless of sector, for us, activities or projects must really take the time to understand the preferences, needs, and experiences of women, and really unpack the specific barriers that they face. We know at USAID that empowering women and girls in the water and sanitation sector leads to incredible economic, health, educational, environmental, and social benefits. So a little bit very quickly about how we sort of measure gender inclusive programs at USAID, just noting that at the agency level, we have a set of standard indicators, and there are many customized gender-related indicators that are developed at the mission level that really help us to monitor progress in terms of gender equality and female empowerment by project. All agency indicators that measure anything at the person level must be disaggregated by sex so that we can understand the gender impact and be able to track it over the period of implementation of activities. And just to give you a quick sense of the types of indicators we are seeing across our activities that focus on gender-related challenges. For example, the percent of women who are reporting that a reduction in the time spent collecting water has resulted in an increase in opportunity to engage in other productive labor activities. Another example is just thinking about the number of laws or policies that address gender equality that have been enhanced, drafted, approved, or implemented either at the national, district, or utility level, and making sure that we are aware and measuring that. I think those are some great examples of sort of very specific ways in which we measure impact. I hope that's been a helpful summary of USAID's perspective on WASH and gender. Back to you, Kelly.
Patricia, thank you so much. And I was just thinking as you were talking how thankful I am that these sessions are recorded, because I certainly think that we could listen to what, has been said in this session. And certainly I will share this session with my colleagues, because I really feel like we're, unpacking and really coming up with the way forward as a sector. And I think that's what's so great about SIWI World Water Week, that brings us together as a sector. And I think, Portia, you've really, just really demonstrated by kind of, being the change and living the change as an agency that you want to see, and showing us about how you're taking such a systematic approach, both in terms of the scope, and I think, as you said now, in terms of the indicators, in terms of the depth that's really needed to kind of lead this transformation. I think you started in the beginning by saying we have to know what is the outcome that we're aiming for, and then we need to make sure that our program is designed to go in that direction across, all of the pillars. So I think you've outlined a number of studies, of evaluations and tools. So if you know how to do it, I'm not sure I could do it, but if you know how to put those resources into the pathables with the links, I think that would be really great, so people who are listening can find them. I think we're all really interested to look at these and see how we can use them in our own programming, and also look at maybe how we can join forces with USAID tackling the research agenda, because I think this is also something that, again, really benefits the sector when, as a group of partners, we're able to kind of make inroads on some of these really critical areas where we can unlock a bottleneck and really kind of take it to the next level. And I think that's really the spirit of the, of working together as partners on the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. So, Portia, thank you so much for that really thoughtful and very deep response that can help us use these tools and look at the examples from USAID. So Sylvia, I'm coming to you now. And again, we said you are the Director of International Programs at the PepsiCo Foundation. And another thing that's been really important about the Sustainable Development Goals is the role of the private sector. And I think when we went into thinking about how these goals would be achieved, because they are very ambitious, we knew that this was going to take a whole of society approach, that governments would lead, but that there's tremendous resources, capacity, expertise, and knowledge in the private sector that is going to be critical for being able to, in so many different dimensions, accelerate and sustain progress towards these goals. So I'm wondering today if you can tell us how PepsiCo, as a private sector partner, has been collaborating in this Water Antes program, and what do you think, in terms of what more is needed to increase women's participation and WASH, and what advice would you have for companies out there to be able to contribute to women's participation in WASH? So, Sylvia, thank you again for joining us, and now over to you.
Thank you, Kellyanne. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone on the line, as well as good evening for those on the other side of the equator. I am delighted to be here, and I would like to add and start with the last portion of your question, Kellyanne, about how the private sector could facilitate or play an important role addressing these matters. And for PepsiCo, it has been through a pre-competitive lens, through alliances and through dialogue, to help achieve and sustain a scale of programs like the one that we're talking about today. These particular issues, whether we talk about women empowerment, whether we talk about access to safe water, irrespectively of through the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals or other lenses, these areas, these issues are incredibly interconnected. And all of them have somewhat the same root causes. And the solution to many of them also yields to unintended benefits, such as economic opportunity for women and girls in multiple ways. The PepsiCo Foundation is a founding member of the Safe Water Network. We have been privileged to be working together for over a decade, and both organizations know each other well. Our collaboration is beyond a financial investment, I will say. It's about know-how, it's about replication of best practices, it's about knowledge sharing, and it's about supporting each other with transparency and credibility. It's also about sharing lessons learned when initiatives may have gone in a different direction than originally stated. This is also part of what the sector needs: transparency in approach, transparency in data, and case studies that are going to back up the evidence that institutions like Safe Water Network are collecting through this program across the different stages in India. I also believe that 2020 marked a pivotal change, a pivotal switch in the case of who collects the water and gender-based norms as it pertains to WASH. With social distancing, with the crisis itself, we saw that the male counterpart in the house, for the very first time, took an active role at pursuing and collecting water, which I personally do not think that it is bad. I actually think that shared responsibilities and in an equitable manner is important, and is a shift in behavior that many of us were trying to attest and seek over the years. Many programs that we have been working with since 2006 start with a thesis behind empowering women. But I believe that the women empowerment piece is already there, is with the communities. The communities are already empowered. The women in the communities are leading the charge. They just need a platform, an alternative to move the needle. And the small water enterprises, whether are the Safe Water Network through their Agile program or to the Water ATM programs, represents an evidence case in which we see the empowerment of women through financial literacy, operations management, sales, distribution, and marketing, pursuing roles that otherwise they wouldn't be pursuing, and presents opportunity, which is how I open my remarks. I think the topic of economic opportunity that is entrench with the provision of access to safe water is there, but we as the sector at large must recognize that what we need to provide, aside from the resource itself, is the platform, the venues, and the niche in which these women can thrive. And they can thrive by themselves with the help of organizations like Safe Water Network that got them organized, provided soft skills and technical skills training, and now you see a tremendous change in society, not only from a gender norms standpoint, but also from an income generating perspective in a way that their livelihoods have been positively benefited. I will say from the PepsiCo Foundation standpoint, we are honored to be working with the Safe Water Network as well as other partners around the world that we have been working with for over the past decade. And that knowledge sharing among partners as well, not only among the private sector, but among partners, is incredibly important. Some organizations are carrying a similar work in other geographies, may very well be in Asia Pacific, in Latin America, or in South Asia. And the organizations themselves benefit from Safe Water Network information, tools, as well as resources. Some of these organizations do not have a venue to look into this level of insights. And when I refer to insights, are insights that are completely positive on what's working well, as well as those insights that may tell you the watch outs or the not to do's. With that in mind, I think that, as I said, this yields to capacity building, this yields to knowledge sharing, and this really leads to a community of practice in which we can see scalability and sustainability of efforts, all leaning towards SDG number 6, that, as we know, coming towards 2030 is quite behind.
Sylvia, thank you so much for those remarks. And I think you've really answered this question and given such a concrete example of how bringing in that private sector perspective. And I think that's what's been really important in being able to see what is it that's that kind of that space where private sector can be able to be a part of this dialogue and be part of the learning, because I think the private sector really, especially on issues like sustainability, economic viability, these are just such contributions, especially in a sector that has struggled with questions like sustainability for so long. And I think it was really exciting. And Pooja, I think it was your point. You said that you, or maybe Portia. Anyway, one of you said I took down the note that there was a point around the fact that we've measured that these systems are having improve sustainability with women operators. So I think this is really exciting and just such a great model for how this type of learning and doing kind of action research approach can be really benefiting not only the program itself, but the sector as a whole in terms of learning experiences. So thank you so much for sharing that. And please, if you have questions, put them in the Pathables link. We've really got the people here who are really putting this into action. So now we're going to come to our fourth and final panel member, and we are really fortunate to have Deepa Karthikeyan here, who is the co-founder and director of Athena Infonomics. Sorry, Deepa,
I know it's a mouthful, Kelly. I don't blame you at all. It's a mouthful.
In India, and Really? Well, first of all, can you tell us what infonomics are for those of us who aren't, totally caught up in the 21st century? And, from your work in the sanitation sector, could you tell us what you've heard about or what you've learned about the barriers that women face in the sanitation workforce and the good examples that you've seen of how we can tackle this gender gap? So, Deepa, thanks so much. We still have about 6 minutes, here. So, thank you so much for your.
I'll keep a tab on time. Kelly, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you and to learn about all the great work that is being done. So infonomics is an accounting term, not the most exciting space, but it literally means it's data as an asset. It's in the law of information. We're a research organization that works with development partners quite a bit, both in sub-Saharan Africa and in South Asia, to support sort of data and dialogue. And I think there's been a nice convergence around those themes here in the group. And really what I'd like to touch upon at some point in the next 5.5 minutes is really think about we all agree data and dialogue is important, but what data you're collecting and how you have that dialogue changes so much of what we achieve as a sector. And I think that's been our experience. And I'll use the work we did in Kenya to talk about that a little bit. So and Kelly, this was in sanitation. And this was a work that we did with support from the Water and Sanitation for the Urban Poor, and specifically looked at the women's participation in the workforce in public sector institutions. And I think the angle there really of interest was, what is the sort of gender equity story like within the government organizations that are actually in charge of sector development, right? Like if the regulators, the service providers, the policymakers and the financing agencies that are responsible for sector development in a country, how do they think about it within their own organizations? Because we think that tells you a lot also about how they're going to think about gender inclusion within the sector. And what we discovered was that, for instance, and we covered 6 key public sector organizations, all the that covered regulation, service provision, policy, and financing in Kenya. And we observed that out of 4,000 odd employees, we started with a gender audit, obviously, and out of the 4,000 odd employees within these organizations, about 36% were women. Now that's, take what you will from that statistic, but what we also noticed that consistently across all of these organizations, there were 3 times more men in leadership than women. Men who held positions as functional heads or were in the board or were directors or had corporate management roles, for instance. And so we went on to do a deep dive. We did over 100 sort of in-depth interviews and structured interviews with both men and women across all of these levels within these organizations to unpack what was really going on. And it was fascinating because, of course, I think there is a nice convergence in Pooja to some of the challenges you mentioned that you found in the water sector. I don't think it's unique. I think a lot of that are also cross-cutting and relevant to sanitation, potentially other areas and other sectors as well. But we saw 4 broad barriers. The first was really barriers related to STEM education. There were twice as many men who had the relevant technical training as women with the same training within these organizations, which meant it was just easier to find and hire and promote men than women. And that had just the law of numbers sort of had its sort of direct impact. In terms of the second challenge we observed was women and sort of limitations or challenges to their bodies at the workplace. And we consistently saw women reporting challenges in the interviews around childcare, around nursing, around menstruation and menopause. And I think the nuance, for instance, increasingly because there's so much more dialogue around menstrual hygiene management at the workplace, the home offices were often better equipped. But so much of the work in the sanitation sector that's being done by these organizations require field assignments and going to the field or visiting a wastewater treatment plant or visiting these field offices that weren't equipped, that did not have the facilities. And it automatically meant fewer women volunteered to do that, or it meant that there was an obvious limiting of field-based assignments for women. There were challenges on voice, and we did a couple of observational. We sat through a couple of meetings to see the dynamic of men versus women and how they participated in dialogue and conversations and decision-making processes. And women did that they were gender tokens because there were policies in place for affirmative action in some of these institutions in terms of just having more women represented. But that just translated into tokenism because it was more sort of a checklist that you needed to tick off more than really making a change. And we saw women reporting both glass cliffs and what we call sort of glass walls, which is gendered silos, women being assigned to certain kinds of jobs, or the job roles being set up in a way which just increases the risk of failure for women versus men, simply because of the way it's described and set up. We also heard of challenges around sexual harassment as being a major concern, and all of the organizations that we mapped and interviewed had a policy in place for sexual harassment, but none of the employees within that organization actually knew what was in it, or there wasn't actual mechanisms or practices in place to address challenges or complaints around it, and that was seen also as a major concern. So those were the key barriers that we noticed, Kelly. But what was also fascinating is we went on to unpack and try and understand how these decision makers and policy makers and regulators thought of the needs of men and women in sanitation planning. And unanimously, they all agreed that women had different needs. For instance, have to perhaps urinate more frequently than men through the day. And they could actually use active anecdotes. So there was just more awareness around the needs of men and women as being different when it came to sanitation. But when we asked them separately what they thought were the biggest challenges to why we weren't moving forward in the sector, gender inclusion didn't figure at all. So it wasn't even in the top 7. It was often more infrastructure access. And it led us to sort of start a dialogue around, is there really a real appetite? And this is, of course, just Kenya. This is not the story of what's happening everywhere. And it could be very different in other countries. But it was a conversation around, is there a real appetite within government for gender inclusion and to think about doing that work? And Kelly, that takes me to your second question of, are there good examples? There probably are, but I don't think there are easy answers. And Portia, I'd love to see more about the work you're doing in terms of encouraging people with activities mapped to development result areas. I do think that's a starting point. But what we realize, of course, we have different organizations taking efforts with different levels of commitment and sincerity. Even within the organizations we interviewed, WASREB, which was the independent regulator, had much higher levels of gender equity than the other organizations. So it's not the same story in all the organizations. But what we came away with was that we did not have easy, simple measures that interrogated practice and allowed government to have good conversations about what they did not have, because so much of the gender data conversation was intellectualized to a point, or it was too technical for them to come together and talk about saying these are, and also to sort of build consensus or have dialogue on. And I think those were sort of really, which prevented some of the things that were being done through development partners to go beyond just a gender tagged intervention, which perpetuates tokenism rather than promoting serious dialogue about what's missing in practice. But I think as a group, we agree dialogue and data matters. How you do it, I think, is where we should have more specific conversations. Sorry, I think I went over time. Thanks, Kelly.
Deepa, that was so interesting. And I think just the first thing I was going to say, we won't have time for questions, but I just want to, can we all commit that we want to have this conversation again, not only next year, but before next year? Because I think that would be really great. I think we could all stay here another hour and really keep going. But I'm just, really excited to hear from the panelists about how these deliberate efforts, the learning, the data, I mean, it does all come together to build an approach that we can take forward as a sector. And I think we've seen some very rigorous work here. I think we've seen some very promising examples, and I think there's a lot, to learn from. And I think we've looked at both how we're gaining better understanding around the root causes of how this kind of gender inequality situation is manifesting itself, but also around how we need to also address these power dynamics and structures that reinforce the gender inequalities beyond just the WASH workforce. So I think this has really been, interesting. And just to say, in the work that UNICEF and WHO do with the joint monitoring program, there is right now a very active discussion about how to bring in gender dimensions into this sector-wide monitoring. So I think when I'm talking about let's find a way to have this conversation before Stockholm next year, in addition to Stockholm next year, I would really like, as UNICEF, to invite this conversation to influence these and provide inputs into this discussion on how the sector should be looking at monitoring WASH and indicators for SDG targets 6.1 and 6.2 and gender. So we are at 8:01, so I'm sure that the closing is really imminent. But I think really it's been fantastic to see how this Water Antes program that's really being scaled up through the SWE Alliance partners in India, not only is providing drinking water for poverty reduction in some of these areas where people most need water, but it's been generating livelihoods and I think helping us build global good practice on addressing gender transformation and WASH. So huge thanks to this fantastic panel. I've learned so much, and I think we all have, and really look forward, thanking also the participants in the audience. Let's really take this forward. I think we have so much, and women and men and boys and girls all have a lot to gain from this hard work that we're doing to show these good examples. So thank you so much, and wishing everyone a happy and fruitful conclusion to your Stockholm World Water Week. So thanks again, and thanks to the technical team for all your support. Have a great day.
Thank you.
And thanks
Thank
again.
you.
Yay!